Hi, I'm Joe Harris, president of the University of Oklahoma. I want to welcome you to our Conversations with the President. This platform gives me the chance to talk to some of the great people who make OU so special. Make sure you're subscribed to Conversations with the President, and you'll be the first to know when new episodes are released. Let's get started. First things first, we're now 3 weeks into the fall of 2024 semester. It's already been an energizing time to have the students, faculty, and staff back on campus, ready to begin a year of unlimited possibilities. Our football team, in case you didn't know, kicked off last weekend, our first time to play in the Southeastern Conference. It was a win, I think, in a lot of ways, and we could not be more excited about what is to follow. Talking about new beginnings, in this inaugural year, we had our last podcast was with Athletic Director Joe Castiglione and the Commissioner of the Southeastern Conference and Director Greg Sankey. And if you haven't had a chance to view it yet, it is absolutely worth the time. I know you'll enjoy it, and our future could not be brighter with Commissioner Sankey at the helm. So today's episode comes in conjunction with the Presidential Speaker Series, which if you don't know, you need to go to it. You should have no excuse for not attending. But it's the event we have twice a year. We bring in truly marquee national, international figure speakers to come in and provide really that element of public intellectual content that is a huge responsibility for us as a university. And today's guest that we're going to have this evening happens to be our podcast for today. It is someone that I have known for a long time. She has never heard of me. So it's the perfect relationship. But she actually has been to OU before. Her name is Dr. Doris Kearns Goodwin. And you know her from so many different facets. I'll catalog a couple of those books, but what she really has done is so important for our country, which is catalog critical, historical, presidential figures that have been people of incredible and substantial consequence, while at the same time making sure that we understand them and relate to them and that larger lessons are drawn from that. It is great to have so many accolades. I'll summarize the top, which is Pulitzer Prize winning, New York Times best-selling, and you are prolific. You're a national treasure. Let me just go over a couple of those. For those, if you don't know them, you'll certainly recognize them. There was a critically acclaimed Leadership in Turbulent Times, which will be the topic of tonight's speech, which incorporates 5 decades of scholarship and studying Presidents Lincoln, both Roosevelts, and Lyndon Johnson, for whom she worked. She won the Pulitzer Prize in history for No Ordinary Time, Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, the home front in World War II. Team of Rivals is one everyone has heard about President Abraham Lincoln, ultimately turned by Steven Spielberg into a film on which she was a consultant and was the basis for that film. Her 9th book is fascinating. It is a tribute and an effort to engage our students, the leadership journey, how 4 kids became president, released next week officially. Also this year, as if it weren't enough, you've released your book back in April. That was done in conjunction with your late husband, and it was a love story, your journey through the 60s together, which is a must-read. You are amazing. I first heard of you, before we get to this, I've now read the formal introduction, but the first time I heard about you, I was young then, and you were the first person to go into the Red Sox locker room, and I thought that was really cool.
Very cool.
Too late, but very cool. So welcome to the show, and thank you for being here.
I'm so glad to be here, and glad to be back at OU again. I mean, I had a wonderful time the last time I was here in 2010, 14 years ago. Oh, my God.
Flies by. And in 14 years ago, we were a better host for you because we actually gave you an award, did we not?
You did indeed, an honorary degree, but I'm very happy to be here with anything.
Fantastic. I know I'll say it for you because you probably won't, but your honorary doctorate here means more than your PhD you earned from Harvard.
Without a question.
We'll go ahead and get that out there. No, we're thrilled to have you back. And I love seeing you on all the late night talk shows. You have a way of making history alive and real, and beyond that, connecting it really to us and to all of us. And you've been so busy lately. You're the only person I know who publishes more books, the older you get, rather than most people slowing down a little bit.
Well, you feel like you don't have a lot of time left, so you got to get out everything you care about. So that book about my husband mattered a lot to me because he had saved 300 boxes over the course of our married life and didn't want to look into them because he felt that the decade of the 60s, his decade, my decade, had ended so sadly. But finally he decided when he turned 80, it's now or never. So we spent it was the last great adventure of our life to go through these boxes and relive the 1960s.
Yeah. It's amazing. And that seems, I think it's fascinating how since 2018, Leadership in Turbulent Times, you've moved from individual, incredibly acclaimed works, Pulitzer Prize winning, turned into movies over individual presidents. You've made this move to talking about leadership and finding common characteristics. And then you went on this journey with your husband through 300 boxes together, which is more than just historical. It's also the life you all lived together. And what caused you to make that shift in your work?
Well, I think the first shift to go to leadership in turbulent times away from yet another biography was that I realized that I still had more that I wanted to know about my four guys, as I call them, Lincoln and the two Roosevelts and Lyndon Johnson. And the problem was that each time I moved from one of them to the other, I would feel guilty, like I was leaving an old boyfriend behind because I had to take all of his books out of the study to make room for the next guy. So I think, what if I just look at them all together? I can keep them as one and through the lens of leadership, which is really what I had studied in grad school. I remember at night we'd have these arguments, does the man make the times or does the time make the man? Are certain qualities inborn or is leadership made? Is it a gift or is it made? And I figured I could use those old questions and look at my guys through a different lens, and then they could be together and they wouldn't have to be jealous of one another. So that's why that book occurred. And then, as I say, with my book on my husband, it was because he finally decided it was time to make those boxes get opened and go through them. And it really was the last great adventure of our life. I'm so glad we did it. It mattered enormously. And then finally, what came out also this year, which sounds crazy to have done that at the same time as the Unfinished Love Story, is a book for young readers. So it's called The Leadership Journey, How Four Kids Became President. And it's going to be out next week. It's just looking at the presidents that I studied when they were young boys. So you could see how they became leaders. They didn't know what they were doing at first. They made mistakes. They acknowledged them. They grew. Otherwise, I think it's hard for kids to think, I can become president. They're on monuments. They're on Mount Rushmore. They're in movies. They're in currency. They're in newspapers. And so this way they could identify with them and hopefully learn the qualities. So it does seem like a lot to be doing as I've gotten older, but there's less time left, so you got to do the things you care about.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. I mean, you seem to be gaining energy and steam throughout the years, and what I love is, for all of us that have seen you on Stephen Colbert, we've seen you on, Good Morning America, you had your own Simpsons character, and you got to play yourself as a Simpsons character, which might be the coolest thing ever.
Certainly for my grandchildren, they feel that was it. When I was on The Simpsons, then I was okay as a cool grandmother.
It really is the high water mark. And I love the energy that you bring to it. Why is it so important that you carry these messages forward? And before you answer it, earlier today, right before this show, we had a lunch, and it was not something that we scheduled, but you scheduled, which was you wanted to meet with a number of students, not so large that you couldn't speak, but large enough that was representative, and you asked to have this luncheon. Most speakers want as much time as they can have to themselves. Why is writing a book for children, why is being around students when you don't have to be as part of your engagement here, why is that so important, and why do you continue to accelerate?
I think partly because I love history so much. I really want to make sure that younger generation, when I read about many schools are cutting down history courses, that in high school there's less being taught, less about literature, less on liberal arts. And I think it's just so important in the foundation of who a person is to know where the country was, where it came from. And if I can meet with students and they were so excited about what they were doing, I felt so much better about where we are. I've now used your sample. Things are not a problem at all. I don't need, in fact, the book can stop. But, you just really, when you care about something, you want more people to care about it too. I want people to love history. History gives you perspective. It gives you hope. It gives you solace. Especially in a time like this where we feel we're living in a really, really rough time, and we are. If you look at history, you can look at the early days of the Great Depression. You can look at the Civil War. You can look at the World War II experience before we turned the tide. Those were even rougher times, and we came through with strength. And if people realize that And the people at the time, they didn't know how it was going to end. We know now that the Civil War ended with the Union restored and emancipation secured. We know that the Great Depression came to an end with the mobilization for war. We know the Allies won World War II. They didn't know that. So the fact that they had the anxiety we have now, we don't know how our chapter will end, but it's up to us to write that chapter, just as it was for the people living then. So history really does provide help and perspective, and I want people to love it.
Yeah, well, you do it in a way that is truly special. What are the hazards? What do you think are the principal hazards of not learning history?
Well, we ignore history at our peril, and then we don't learn from it. And the mistakes that the people made in the past, we're going to make again. You think about an individual, the best way you grow is to have humility, to acknowledge errors and learn from your mistakes. I mean, Lincoln, for example, when he was young, he gave an opponent a real thrashing when they were in a debate. And he made fun of the way he walked and the way he talked, and everybody started laughing. Then he looked over, and the opponent was crying. He realized he had just gone too far, and he promised himself he would never do that again. He went over to the opponent's house that night and apologized. But you watch people learning how to acknowledge errors. The same thing is true for history. We can see what errors our forefathers made, what strengths they had, what triumphs they had, and hopefully we learn so we don't repeat the same errors that they had before.
Is there a hazard that in reading the American story that we begin to take it for granted and assume that it's always a given that will prevail?
Absolutely right. I mean, progress is a very complicated thing. We go for a certain step, and then we go back, and then we go forward again, and then we go back. We're seeing that absolutely right now. And I think if we think that it's just going to go endlessly forward and we don't have to have anything to do with it, then that's the real problem. Democracy depends on the citizens feeling that they're responsible for keeping the country moving forward toward our ideals.
Yeah, I mean, so I speak, I used to have my own class from 97
in
until...
the old days,
exactly. And then...
When you were young.
When I was young, and yeah, exactly. Through rose-colored glasses, it was all perfect. But, you know, after COVID, I didn't, and I'd always taught at the law school, and now I try and teach the large... each guest lecture in each of the large sections of American federal government.
Oh, good.
And it's fascinating to me. You know, we have the top students and, you know, the best and the brightest from the area, and I would argue across large parts of the country. They're not coming in equipped with these tools. And as you said, many places are cutting back and don't require a course in government. And you see, I think, a lot of people talking about, you know, developing individuals sort of transactionally for a job versus as an educated citizenry. When you think about the role of higher education in our democracy, having, you know, been a professor, what are your thoughts on the role of higher education in our democracy?
I mean, I can understand people's concerns, given the cost of education now, that they want to be sure that when they get out, they'll have a job to help pay back the loans to go forward. But for higher education, there's a larger goal, I think, as well, which is to develop character in the people that are coming here as students. And how do you develop character? You develop it through history, through literature, through science, through any course that they're studying, but they have to be able to grow as a person as a result. They're going to be a different person by the time they're a senior from when they're a freshman. And it's not just the knowledge in their head, it's learning how to think critically, to be able to argue, to accept information, to know what's real and what's not real. And all of those qualities really can be taught in history and literature, as well as in the sciences, where you might be able to get a job, or mathematics to go straight forward to what you're doing. Learning how to write is important no matter where you go, and it just makes you a person. But I think most importantly, there are certain qualities that you want to learn throughout your education, and that is humility, so that you can know what you don't know and you can ask to find it. Empathy is so important, and I think so missing in our country in many places today, where you understand other people's points of view. I mean, when Lincoln was young and he read books about other people who had fuller lives than he did or his father did on their hardscrabble farm, he could envision that maybe I can be like that person. I can imagine myself that person. And that gives you the ambition to get forward. He left the farm. He went to a clerk in a young town, and then he becomes eventually Abraham Lincoln. But unless you have that hope and that vision of another way of life, you can't change where you are. So that's what history and literature can do for you. You read the great books, and you suddenly become that person that you dreamed of.
I'm always jealous. I was a confused student in college here at the University of Oklahoma for undergrad. I was pre-med through economics with a minor in zoology, which tells you I had no idea what I was doing. My wife received, we call it letters here, but a classics degree, and I'm always so jealous of the fact that she's steeped in history and literature and language, and it really does bring with it benefits that are otherwise unavailable, and they matter fundamentally.
Yeah, I wonder sometimes whether universities, if problems are in liberal arts, both history and literature, maybe you could teach them together, because they work. I mean, history and literature together are terrific.
Absolutely.
When you're studying the time, you study the literature of the time, and it could be a required course that satisfies both English and history at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think getting creative with the curriculum is critical so that we communicate those values and reinforce and help forge the kind of character you're talking about. All right, you have so many stories that are just unbelievable that you've lived that are, could you sort of relate, and maybe we tie it into what our students always ask, which is, how did you arrive at your career? What led you there? Could you tell us one of your sort of, I know you have an innumerable, but stories from your and your husband's career ladder in the early days and how you arrived there and how it shaped your career?
Well, there's no question for me that I'd loved history from the time I was a little girl, and I had history teachers in high school who taught me that history as biography could allow you to know the leaders who lived before, and you could feel like they were somebody you could talk to. In fact, I do end up talking to these dead presidents that I've studied all the time. They don't answer me, but I wake up thinking about them in the morning, and I think about them when I go to bed at night. So that love of history was always there, but it might have gone in any direction. In fact, in college, I was studying international relations. I studied languages, and I'd gotten a Fulbright to go to Paris and Brussels, but then I didn't go, in part because I had a boyfriend that I didn't want to leave behind, but also because I'd gone to the Civil Rights March in August of 1963, and it was so thrilling to be part of something larger than myself, and I realized that so much is happening in America right now, and I want to be here to be part of that whole civil rights movement. So by not going to that Brussels or Paris Fulbright, I never studied languages, I never lived abroad, but I became an American historian. So that's things change. As you know, you obviously didn't become a zoologist, although you may go to study animals still. Who knows what you do in your private time. But then I was going to be a Supreme Court historian, mainly because I had a professor at Harvard who was a great teacher of constitutional law. So I wrote my PhD thesis in that. I would have been studying the Supreme Court, teaching the Supreme Court, had it not been for the fact that I ended up working for Lyndon Johnson and was able to be on the White House staff, help him on his memoirs. The conversations with him became my first book on him, and it did well enough that I thought, well, maybe I'll do another president. So then I do Franklin Roosevelt. The next thing you do Lincoln. The next thing you have Teddy Roosevelt. All of a sudden you're a presidential historian. It's much more random, I think, than people realize. It's not like you planned it all out, but you go down different paths and they feel really good, and then you stay on those paths.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, the story about how you met, President Johnson, and could you just say for a minute how you first met him and how you almost destroyed your career immediately?
It is true. It was an embarrassing beginning. I was chosen as a White House Fellow when I was a graduate student at Harvard, and it's a program that allows you to work for the president or a cabinet officer for a year. And we had a big dance at the White House the night we were selected. He did dance with me. It wasn't peculiar because there were only 3 women out of the 16 White House Fellows. But as he twirled me around the floor in good Texas fashion, I was dipping down to the floor, he whispered that he wanted me to be assigned directly to him in the White House. But it was not to be that simple. For in the months prior to my selection, like so many young people, I was active in the anti-Vietnam War movement. And a friend of mine had co-authored an article, which we just sent out to the universe, including the New Republic, about the need for a third-party candidate to challenge Lyndon Johnson. And they didn't publish it. We didn't hear anything. And then suddenly this dance occurs. And a few days later, the article appeared with the New Republic's title, How to Remove Lyndon Johnson in 1968.
Oh.
So it was pretty embarrassing. It became a matter of state in the White House, which I only realized in recent years. I went back and found the journals that tell you what the president does every day. He actually had meetings about what to do about Doris Kearns. And some people thought he would destroy the entire program, not just let me out of the program. But instead, he famously said, bring her down here for a year, and if I can't win her over, no one can. So I did eventually end up working for him in the White House and accompany him to his ranch. And that really changed my life because I was so lucky to have those years of talking to a real president. Now, and then I decided that I'd study other presidents who had also been consequential, as Lyndon Johnson was. And that's what led me on to Franklin Roosevelt and Teddy Roosevelt and Abraham Lincoln. And all of a sudden, 50 years have gone by.
Well, and for those that haven't had the opportunity, Love Letters is, it accomplishes a lot of things. One of those is to make clear just how special you and your late husband, are and were individually and as sort of the ultimate power couple. Talk about people of consequence.
Well, what made this whole journey of going through the boxes, he'd kept these boxes all our married life. 300 of them went from cellars to attics to storage, and he wouldn't open them. They were a time capsule of the 60s because he was in the plane with John Kennedy in 1960 during his campaign, as in his 20s. He was then on the White House staff with JFK. He was in the White House the night the body was brought back, and he was responsible for getting the eternal flame that Jackie wanted. He'd been involved with Jackie Kennedy's projects on the arts, and then he ended up going to work for LBJ, was involved with all of his great speeches on civil rights having to do with voting rights after Selma, the Selma speech to the joint session of Congress, the Howard University speech on affirmative action, and all the Great Society stuff that he loved being a part of. But then he turned against the war. He had left Lyndon Johnson. He goes with Senator McCarthy in New Hampshire. And then when Bobby entered the race, Bobby Kennedy, he was so close to Bobby. He was with Bobby when he died. So he was everywhere in the 60s, but it had ended so sadly with Martin Luther King's death, with Bobby Kennedy's death, with the riots in the cities and the campus violence, that he didn't want to go backward. He just wanted to go forward. Until finally one day he comes, oh, this is perfect for here. He comes down the steps singing Oklahoma. Oh, what a beautiful morning.
Fantastic.
I said, what's going on? He said, I've just decided it's time to, he turned 80. It's time to open the boxes. It's now or never.
Singing Oklahoma.
Singing Oklahoma.
Rogers and Hammerstein come to the rescue.
Yeah. So then he said, if I have any wisdom to dispense, I better start dispensing now. It's getting late. So we made a pact that every weekend we would go through the boxes, and we'd do it chronologically. So we would pretend we didn't know what was happening next so that we could enjoy when Dick was a young law student at Harvard, when he clerked for Justice Frankfurter, when he eventually went in to be a speechwriter for JFK without knowing that JFK was going to die. So you could just imagine, again, the birth of the Peace Corps or the early days of the debate, the great debate with Richard Nixon. Everything comes back and echoing in time as we've been through debates right now. And then the sadness happened, and then you pick it up with the Great Society, and he was there. There's a great story where he's been in the White House only about a month, and Johnson and Bill Moyers had already been working together. So Moyers comes and says, the president wants to talk to us about a program for the Johnsons. Now that he's gotten the tax bill through that's Kennedy's, he's getting the civil rights bill through that's Kennedy's, he wants his own agenda. So Dick said, are we meeting in the Oval Office? And Bill Moyers says, no, we're going to the White House pool. So they go to the pool, and there's Lyndon Johnson swimming naked up and down the pool, side-stroking. Looking like a whale, Dick said, going up and down. And Bill Moyers and Dick are standing on the sideline with their suits and ties on. So John said, what's the matter, guys? Come on in. So they, of course, had to strip on the spot. And then you have 3 naked guys swimming in the pool. And finally Johnson pulls over to the side, and he said, okay, we got to discuss my agenda. And he knew exactly what he wanted, even from the first day he became president. This was 4 months later. He said, I want Medicare. I want aid to education. I want civil rights. I want voting rights. I want immigration reform. So they decided they'd have to make a speech to get to the outline of what his program would be. And it's going to be at the University of Michigan on May 22nd. It gives you a deadline to come up with the programs. And then you had to come up with a name. So they had all sorts of debates. What should we call this thing? Dick said it wasn't quite like naming a baby, but it was pretty important to LBJ. So should it be a better deal than a new deal? Should it be the Glorious Society, the Good Society? Finally, Dick wrote in a couple speeches, Great Society, and it caught on. So the Great Society was born in a pool with 3 naked guys. So these are the stories that come out of the boxes.
Isn't that incredible? I can't imagine how fulfilling it was during your husband's final years to spend that time tracking those early years together.
And what mattered most of all was that he had left with such grievances about the war in Vietnam, feeling like it had destroyed the Great Society programs, which meant that his legacy, he thought, as well as more importantly the country's legacy, was undone. And when we really relived 1964 and 65, he knew, obviously, rationally, that much had happened then. They were still there. All those programs, so many of them are still there. And I remember he was just experiencing the joy of being involved with Lyndon Johnson in that heady time. And he went upstairs and he said to me, "Oh, my God, I'm feeling affection for the old guy again." And he did. He let that anger go. And by the end of his life, in those last months, he realized that he had made a difference. Johnson certainly had made a difference, and the country had moved forward in a very positive way. It gave him a peace in those last months of his life.
It's interesting how the historical perspective cured the individual concerns.
Absolutely so.
It's a great tonic.
It really was. I mean, I had no idea when we started the boxes that would be the ultimate result, that he would come to peace with this. But he really did, and that's what made me so happy, because we'd argued about LBJ and JFK our whole married life. I would argue JFK couldn't have gotten the bills through that LBJ did, and he'd say, but LBJ inspired JFK. And we ended up realizing they were both the same, different sides of the same coin. They both needed each other in many ways.
And for those that haven't lived in D.C. and been around the staff of presidents, to make the jump from Kennedy to Johnson's staff was extraordinary.
It really was, because there was a fault line then between the two. There was a real anger on the part, especially between Bobby Kennedy and LBJ. And so even when Johnson first wanted Dick to come over, there's a telephone conversation with Bill Moyers, and he says to Moyers, "I need a speechwriter here." This is in March of '64, so it's only 4 months after the assassination. "I want somebody to put sex into my speeches. I want somebody to put rhythm into my speeches. I want somebody to have great Churchillian phrases. Who can that be?" And Moyers knew Dick because they'd been in the Peace Corps working together. He said, "Well, the only one I know is Dick Goodwin, but he's not one of us." And that meant that he was on the other side. But finally Johnson said, "Well, let's try him out." And I think maybe there was always a degree of suspicion of him because he'd been a Kennedy.
Sure.
It's as if once you're a Kennedy, you're always a Kennedy. But in the end, they worked together incredibly well.
It's beautiful and so impactful. I mean, the Great Society is, in many ways, defines where we are and who we are today. And I do know that when you look at it through the lens of the day, which is much more narrow, the aperture is much tighter than it is when you look at it from a historical perspective. I take it you have concerns about where we stand right now, even on those signature events. When we think about, voting rights and civil rights, as you sit here today, is some of that on your mind as you think about expanding the lessons that you've learned?
Without a question. I mean, I think about that moment in 1965 after the Selma demonstrations when the conscience of the country was fired, when they watched, I did too, I was in graduate school, I watched what happened when the peaceful marches were coming across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and they were simply arguing that the black people should have the right to register. And there were all sorts of devices in the South that prevented it from happening. They would make you, if you were a black, cite the 15th Amendment, the 16th Amendment, how many seeds in a watermelon, things that were unanswerable, and then they deny registration. And Martin Luther King chose Selma because there were 55% were black in the town, but only 2% were registered. So voting is central to an American democracy, right? So they're coming across the bridge peacefully, and the Alabama State Troopers go right into them with whips and clubs and billy clubs, and they fell them to the ground, and everybody saw it on television. And that fired the conscience of the country. So Johnson realized it's time now to make a major speech to call for a federal protection of voting rights. And that was the great We Shall Overcome speech that my husband was lucky enough to help him work on. And I remember when that happened and when it passed, I felt like the country was moving so far forward. And now we see that voting rights are being restricted in some states after another. Voting should be something that everybody eligible should vote. We should have a national holiday for voting. It seems to me in a democracy is you can throw the leaders out and you can vote them in. And you have to vote to be able to do that. It's the central vote.
And you see it being restricted and limited.
They had created drop boxes during COVID. They're reducing some of the drop boxes, reducing the amount of time you can be on the line, making it harder to be able to vote. We should be making it easier to vote. We have to just trust the way that people vote. It may not be the way you want. It could go either way, but at least if more people vote, we're getting the will of the people behind it.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time. And I think your knowledge of both the presidential figures that you have, for whom you've done biographies, and also just your, living through the 60s, as you look at this sort of moment in time, do you do you take solace in what history has provided in terms of solution, or does it amplify your concern?
Well, you do realize, as we were saying earlier, that progress is not a straight line, that you go backwards to go forward. And usually it's going to take the arousal of the citizens to make it go forward again. So that I think we are at one of those times now where people have to become active. And if they believe in certain values of climate change or gun safety or a woman's right to choose, they have to fight for it. It's not going to just happen by them sitting back and complaining and saying that this is bad, we're going backward. And they have to persuade other people why we have to move forward. You need to have not just the policy that you want in charge, you want to be able to let the country feel this is a good thing. I mean, that's what happened in the 60s that was so encouraging, that in 1964 and 65, the overwhelming majority of the country believed it was right to end segregation in the South. They believed that it was right to take away these restrictions on voting. And people felt better when those laws were passed. So that the responsibility, if you're going to move forward, is not to move forward in a way that's going to turn people away by calling people names or diminishing what they are. You have to feel empathy for why do these people feel this other way and persuade them. That's what Lincoln said, that public sentiment was everything in a democracy. Not public opinion, but a settled feeling that something is right or something is wrong. Like a settled feeling that it was wrong to have segregation, it was wrong to have slavery. And that once you do that, then you can get movement in the society. So for young people, they're going to have the patience that the civil rights movement have. If they want to demonstrate or protest, they're going to have to do it in such a way that it doesn't take away people's desire to listen to you by becoming violent or becoming disturbing, but it educates them to want to change in that direction. And it's hard for people because they see that it's taking a long time, but it took a long time for any of these other changes to be made, and you just have to sometimes be patient.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You look at the, a lot of these surveys go back to the 60s, and you look at public sentiment towards confidence in government institutions and the three branches. And we know during the time that you were working in the White House, all the way through the Johnson administration, the favorability towards the government doing the right thing was, a supermajority. It was at least 60% in that range. Now it is so low. It's in the teens. And there's also, with clarity, a strategy around division and hate. Does this lead us to why you're engaging in these works right now, which is the importance of a civics education and an understanding of individuals' roles in our democracy?
In a certain sense, the government is us. It's not some foreign body. So that if you can persuade people that they can make changes at the local level, maybe it's too hard right now to reach Washington with that broken system we have there. But at the moment, if you could be on a school board, if you could be in the city council, or you could be arguing a position in front of the city council, then you can move up to get the state. Then you can move up to a national level. But there's got to be the belief, if you don't have confidence that you can change things, then there's no collective action possible. And while it may be that confidence is shattered at times, or it's disappointed at times, you just keep going. What if the civil rights people had stopped marching for civil rights because they didn't get a law in the 1950s? Then we wouldn't be where we were. What if the women's movement had not happened, or the gay rights movement, or the anti-slavery movement? All the important changes in society have come from the ground up, so that it's not enough now to just be bewildered by what's happening and be upset about it. You just have to know that you start mobilizing with people and you educate people and change people's minds, and that's what has to happen in a democracy.
They've told me I can't take much more of your time. Let's
Who's
try
the they? Who's the they above
these
you?
people that are in charge of. And so, sort of briefly, what gives you the greatest optimism for our collective future?
I really do feel, just looking at the students we had lunch with today, they were all energized, they were excited, they had questions, they were thinking about their own futures. They were really interesting questions that they asked, showing a deep understanding of our system, that it was not just a system of top-down, where you just wanted to be one of the people in government, that you wanted to also be an activist and an agitator, maybe arguing from the ground up. I think young people they've had a really hard time, this younger generation right now, between COVID and the polarization in the country. But there's a spirit that I think seems to be rising among them. And I certainly felt it today at the university. And if those kids represent the young people, I'm going to feel like, yes, we're going to be fine. As an older person, I have to depend on young. Sometimes I wish that we had a gap year where kids coming out of high school could go to a service program in a just like the Peace Corps, but in America. And you could be in a different part of the country. If you're in the country, you go to the city. If you're in the city, you go to the country. If you're in the East, you go to the West. If you're in the East, you go to the Midwest. And you learn about the way other people are thinking and feeling. That's so important, because right now people are in silos. The television or the cable they watch or the social media they read is just their own. And they're not getting oftentimes an understanding of what other people are really feeling and thinking, because there's so much disinformation around. So if you go and live with the people in those families in those same areas, you're going to have to see them for what they really are. And I think that would be a great thing to happen for our country.
Yeah, the inherent good and commonalities are only revealed if you spend time with those people not like yourself. And we're really good at making sure we're only around people like ourselves. And you're right. That is, to me, it fascinates me. Right? You see this when I talk to these students in the American federal government class, one of the questions I'll ask is, how many of us have judged those in the opposing political party as not being worthy of being heard? And all of us have.
Right.
Right? It's not like, and that's a very dangerous thing. Because the truth is, whenever we actually speak to people not like ourselves, we find out that we're more alike than we are different.
I really think that's true. I mean, one of the things Teddy Roosevelt warned against was that democracy would be in peril if people in different parties, sections, and regions began thinking of each other as the other, rather than as common American citizens. And he spent his presidency trying to bind that country together. He had had so many different experiences. He had been a police commissioner. He'd been a civil service commissioner. He'd been in the Army with the Rough Riders. He'd been a cowboy in the West. He'd been a dude in the East. And he has a square deal for the rich and the poor, the capitalist and the wage worker. He went right down the center where people were. And I think that's what we need somehow.
I'm not sure if you've heard this quote, but a house divided. I'm just kidding. You are the.
Well, tell me where you heard that,
right.
sir.
I'll explain it to you later.
Yeah, I mean, it's embarrassing for me to not know
it
it
is a little
here.
embarrassing. Yeah, no. Right, I was going to say you're as knowledgeable as Doris Kearns Goodwin. This has been an incredible treat for me. Tonight,
me too.
I'm not going to get a chance to, because tonight when it ends, I've already heard from so many of my friends who have told me I have to meet her. I'm so excited she's going to be here. I'm a fan guy. I'm a fan girl. And they're going to mob you afterwards, and you have book signings. But you are someone that I have always looked to. I don't think it's fair to say hero, but someone I've looked up to and admired, and not just because of your substance, but because of the way you connect with people, and that matters. And I'm grateful to finally meet the person that when I was young had the audacity to go into the all-male locker room of the Red Sox, and now, has contributed so much and is contributing so much to our society, and not slowing down, and in fact, so many ways accelerating. So thank you for being here.
I'm so glad to be here. What a great treat
joy
for me.
Yeah, and to all of our listeners, thank you for listening. I've got to thank them. But we're going to make sure that the gap between times that you're at OU is no longer this long again. So
Deal.
Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to all of our listeners. Appreciate you.